Hey, what's happening? I was 2 seconds late, and it's all chaotic now. And the whole idea of an opening that was going to be really smooth has been completely shot down. Instead, what you get is this crazy new focus and new camera and new situation. But do not be confused or startled. It is, in fact, the Anticlimactic Non-Show with your host. The Anticlimactic Non-Show starting right here on YouTube today. Hey, look, we have a viewer. You are the first viewer of the Anticlimactic Non-Show with your host. And today we're talking about a wide variety of things. We are also trying the new camera, which is to use the phone camera mounted onto a stand so that you're more mobile, right? I can take you around and you're looking at stuff and we can be doing. It's got a little more mobility to it. I hope it doesn't make you seasick or, you know, in other ways, uncomfortable. And we changed lighting, which I think I'm a lot happier about the lighting now. Aren't you? I don't know if you looked at yesterday's footage. It's all pretty dark. This is the Anticlimactic Non-Show, episode 3. And we are just getting started here with a program that's going to be on the air, if you will, live streaming on YouTube at the same time every day, 9 a.m. if you're on the West Coast, noon if you're in New York City, for example, 5 p.m. in England, 10:30, half 10 in Mumbai, 2 a.m. in Tokyo, 4 a.m. in Australia. And the program seeks to discuss a wide variety of topics, invite you to participate. I believe there's a chat window, but now that I'm using the phone cam, I can't operate the chat window. See what we're learning each time we fire up the Anticlimactic Non-Show? Now, I have done radio for many, many years and never tried doing live streaming. This is the first live streaming show that I've ever put up. I've done shows on the net for the Giants. I did one for 3 years. I've done produced video shows where I would produce a video and then put it up on the net at a certain time. But I've not found a vlogging site that I really like enough to make work like this until now. And what YouTube is proposing is interesting for a lot of different reasons to me. It's somewhere between FCC-controlled radio, which I used to do, and free internet. From the standpoint of YouTube's primacy in this sort of field and the relationships they're making copyright-wise all along as they've been going along. If you'll notice, when I started the first episode and just tried to drop whatever I wanted, music wherever I wanted, etc., that was a test episode with the intent being, what's going to happen copyright-wise? Article 13 is a thing that you should know about. If you're not familiar, you can even watch a YouTube video about it because they've got production facility people who are interested in that as well. Article 13 in this European context means that some things won't be visible at all, or just because I did that, I shot that way while I was live streaming without the licensed permission of the audio, I could be fined, right? Or I could be found liable. So all of this intersects with my career as a person who has protested the control of airwaves or the spectrum, which is what we call sort of everything that is live. The spectrum, when it began, was used, I think, for government agencies or interests of certain types to figure out how to sort of control or regulate the internet. Because it is the very definition of spectrum. It's a 24/7 live thing. So now comes the era when we're defining what a free internet is, what net neutrality is. And I think that trying to live stream for me is about trying to bring what I brought to pirate radio in the 90s and to non-corporate radio in the aughts and in the 90s, and to other kinds of broadcasts, non-commercial broadcast. I'd like to bring that to this show. This isn't really a show. I have to keep reminding myself that as well. This is the Anticlimactic Non-Show. which has as its feature the fact that it probably won't be climactic in any way, and it isn't a show with your host. And I'm just talking a little bit today about, as we open, about one of my interests with live streaming and the question of what we can and cannot say on the internet, and who adjudicates what we can play, what we cannot play. So in yesterday's episode, what I did was I dropped in music at the 20-minute mark, like I normally would if I was doing a show on the radio. So I talked for 20 minutes, and then I dropped some music, a track, and then I talked for 20 minutes and I dropped a track. And then I tested to see what it would do. And YouTube, there were copyright claims on all of that. Now you can see that material in the United States, I'm noticing, but the question becomes whether you would be able to see that material in Europe or Australia or other places. And then whether or not, first of all, what is that then? I don't want to produce content for any one place. And one of the goals of the show, as stated by the timings here, is if it's 4 in the morning and you're in New Zealand and you're awake and you're on YouTube and you're like, what is this guy doing over here? Or 2 a.m. in Tokyo and you're having that experience, or 10:30 in Mumbai, I'd like your participation in this programming, because to me it would be interesting to get a small group of people around the world discussing a certain array of topics. I think is sort of more interesting to me for this purpose. One of the things I thought I'd do too is every day take a look at the headlines like I normally would if I was producing news, which is what I did for many years. And so today I was taking a look before we fired up the cast about what's going on. And I think one of the more fascinating stories is this science sort of concern coming out of Shenzhen, China, where a Chinese researcher by the name of He Jiankui, He has declared that he has genetically edited babies, human children, and now claims that a second pregnancy is in a very early stage. And according to him, according to the AP, He said needs more time to be monitored to see if it will last. I'm using AP as the source here, so there's some things you should probably know quickly, and that is that some of the people they speak to are, have interrelated ownership. In this case, Howard Hughes Medical Institute supports AP's Health and Science Department, and two of the experts that they're discussing this matter with are also paid by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. One of them is the California Berkeley scientist, Jennifer Doudna, I think that's how you pronounce her name, who was one of the inventors of the CRISPR gene editing tool that He says he used. CRISPR, that's CRISPR, you may or may not have heard of it, but this is what this gene editing material, this is one of the devices that they're using now that we've identified the genome and are dealing with gene control and manipulation and editing. She says, quote, to the AP, this is a truly unacceptable development. I'm grateful that he appeared today, and this is the thing, He announced that this has happened and then didn't answer questions very well, apparently. But I don't think that we heard answers. We still need to understand the motivation for this. Now, He said his motivation was, and the thing that he edited out was an attempt to make them resistant to the AIDS virus, HIV, which is a bizarre thing to me, but to him it seemed sensible because there's no vaccine for it. That was the rationale that he gave. The other expert, after He came out today and said, okay, there's a possible second one, and gave some answers, says he feels more disturbed now. It's an appalling example of what not to do about a promising technology that has great potential to benefit society. I hope it never happens again. So there's tremendous resistance to gene editing of humans. And it is inevitable, don't you think? And the ethics of it are something we have not deliberated, I feel, effectively. So that was sort of an interesting thing. The BBC is covering, there's a conflict right now in the sea that surrounds Crimea. Crimea juts out below the Ukraine. And in 2014, Putin and the Russians aggressively seized Crimea. And there has been tension there for some time. And now there are clashes since Sunday in the sea there. And what's going on is that Putin is doing what he kind of normally does, I feel, and today is saying that the clashes in the sea are being staged by Petro Poroshenko, who is the leader in Ukraine in advance of elections in the Ukraine, that he's posturing. And in response, Poroshenko has told the BBC here that he says, "Don't think it is fun," he warned. The country he believes is under threat of a full-scale war with Russia. So tension in this Crimean area. There are three now entities surrounding this body of water. The Russians, the Ukrainians, and Crimea. And their interests in that sea, I think, are about much more than the land-based access. So there is some tension, I think, that is significant. Man, I'm out of coffee and I'm coughing. I don't have any Topo Chico today. I was also taking a look at the breaking news in the Times and suddenly came across the fact that the Oakland A's in Oakland have finally, after many, many years in Oakland now, 10, 12 years, we've been fighting and arguing. Mayoral races have had it as a central element. This question of the complex there at the Coliseum, which is absurdly outdated, outmoded, and has many problems. Finding a home for the A's was something that, or the Raiders for that example, the Raiders are gone. They're going to Las Vegas. It couldn't be solved. Has come to a conclusion. The Athletics have chosen Howard Terminal along the Oakland waterfront, which was one of the sites that had been talked about. They're going to put in a park. They're describing it as a ballpark within a park. I think later today you're going to hear more about that if you're out in the Bay. That's exciting news for fans of baseball and fans of Oakland. Long time coming in that situation. But I was looking at the Times, and we've got basically more Manafort-Mueller material. Pelosi and how she's negotiating with this situation in advance of January. Taking a look at the Mercury News, they're covering this romaine lettuce from Central California is in the midst of being blamed for an E. coli outbreak. And now they're covering the farmers who are frustrated after this tainted romaine has been tied to their area, because as you might imagine, the problems it would cause for them trying to sell the material. There was a similar E. coli outbreak in 2006 in spinach. The Mercury News, John Woolfolk of the Mercury News here tells us. And it has serious economic effects. There is rain in California. That is probably pretty good. I haven't found much today about wildfire coverage. In future episodes, maybe what we'll do is we'll do more of that. We'll do news a little tighter. I'll write it up if I can. And we'll have news at the top of the hour when we start the show. But just to give you an idea of how I do that, I pull up multiple variety of sources in advance of the program. I read as much as I can about what's going on. I look for things that I think might be interesting, and then I'm hoping to, we can elaborate on them as the show becomes more collaborative with you as an audience viewer. We can have discussions about said material. Now today also, a new issue of Harper's has arrived. The December issue of Harper's Magazine has arrived, and I was thinking we'd do a couple of things out of it. One is the idea of reading the index. On the iVlog site, when I was practicing in advance of doing this YouTube streaming, I read the Harper's Index out one day just to see how does that flow. Is that a thing that works? Is it a thing you can read? I mean, is it a thing that can be appreciated that way? And it kind of worked. There are some interesting things about how the Harper's Index balances out, or they make almost comical rhythms in the way they arrange the stats. So I thought we could do that as well. And there's a couple of really great articles in this month's issue. I don't know that we have to read them all today, but we're definitely going to come back to this this month, or in December. So rather than spoil it for Harper's, one of the things I would do is promote the magazine. It is one of, if not the oldest in the United States of America, dealing with American cultural and social and literature and art. And it's a monthly, founded in 1850. Been reading it for many, many years, and I really appreciate it. So we will be featuring it here. But why don't you do us all a favor? Save the magazine industry. Save Harper's, which has been around since 1850, by going right now and subscribing and receiving your own copy in your mailbox every month. It is like a burst of intellectual food every month that arrives. And what's cool about being a subscriber is, it's not December yet, right? That's Saturday, I believe, is the first. And look, woohoo, I got the December goodies. And that's always a nice feeling about the magazine subscription culture. You get the New Yorker before everybody else. You get the magazine before everybody else. There's something nice about, if that material generates discourse, having had read source material in advance is useful. This happened with the wildfires, as a matter of fact. The Harper's pieces on the wildfires were unbelievable. Comprehensive discussions about how these are imminent and going to get worse because of how we've developed the West Coast. Poorly, as a matter of fact. So we're going to read some stuff from Harper's today. The other thing that came up was I was talking to my son, or communicating with him poorly, I should say. And he asked me a question about a time in his life that he has no memory of, which is a phenomenon that I need to grasp more carefully, I think. We were talking about memory in the last episode, about how memory it can be like a point with a fog around it. It has a place in time and space that gives it a point, an access point. But the tail of it, or the memory of the thought, is foggier than that. And one of the things that's true about memory is that it's yours. You're in possession of it. And I think that people have a notion that you can't pursue truth from multiple points of view. I mean, we could talk about Rashomon as an example of this. So when we talk about memory and an event occurring, and 6 or 7 or 10 people's memory of that event, we get into the realm of understanding, a lot of things about what truth is, what relative truth is, what we accept as memory, what we ourselves define as, no, that's not what happened, that's what happened. In a way, I think that constitutes who we are. I think it makes us who we are. And my son was asking about a time that he could not remember. And I was short with him, and I realized that doesn't make any sense. He has no memory of that time. I should be really careful about how I relate to him the answer to this question, right? It should be sort of narrated in a way that is faithful to the truth. right? Uh, why do I say it that way? Well, he could ask me, and he could ask his mother, or he could ask his tia Amy, or he could ask someone else about that time. And their answers, and whether they jibe or not with what I've said to him, are going to make him wonder what is true, what is true. So I was going to take us back in a flashback here to the years when he was a very young child, infant. And that ends up bringing up a lot of interesting things because it relates to the time we were talking about formalistic production of radio. So that brings us to the 20-minute mark, and what I'm going to do right now is play some music because I think what's cool is while it's live streaming, it's not like they can stop the music from playing. It's only the saved object that goes up where the music that's got the copyright issues or whatever you want to say are a concern. So let's take a little break. That's been a lot of me rat-a-tat-tat-tat. You are listening to the AntiClimactic NonShow. Every day right here at noon in New York City, 9 a.m. in California, 2 a.m. Tokyo. The AntiClimactic NonShow with your host. Let's see what we got to listen to. Something interesting, I hope. How about so if I play just even that much of that, there will be a copyright claim, content claim. If I was doing this on the radio, that would be a normal amount of music that I would drop in as a break between like rat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat-a-tat and the next whatever we're doing next. It's unusual to me that now that aspect of licensing in the YouTube world is becoming as strict as it is. Uh, I feel we should absolutely resist this notion. I'm not sure exactly how, and I want to start getting into some of those net neutrality issues. I want to try to find some organizations we can talk to and groups we can join in with. See, already one of the things that's going on here is the scale is way wider on this camera. So there's stuff in frame that wasn't in frame when we were shooting before. So again, this is the AntiClimactic NonShow, and I am just, this is episode 3, so what we're doing right now is kind of figuring things out. Like what I figured out yesterday is, look how much the light changes, because this thing is a reflective surface. So if I go like that, bang, it's so much darker, right? Wow, it's like fascinating how light works to me. I love that. And we were going to paint this too. We're going to get into, we've been making this since episode 1, and so it's kind of like an ongoing sort of aspect representing various stuff that's happening. And one of the things we're going to do now is we're going to knock out that white, and I think I'm going to use like a lime green in there. So the question my son asked me was, why did we move to Japan? That's what my son asked me. He goes, why did we move to Japan in 2005? Why did we move to Japan? And I was like, wow, that is so much information that I don't know how to express. And instead, I reacted emotionally. I thought, what do you mean? I can't believe, you know. And then I realized, no, that's idiotic. The boy wasn't even 3 years old, right? So I had not been confronted by that before as a parent. That mistake I'm making is super detrimental to being able to share any information about things that happen or happened. And so in working on that, I decided to write something to him about the answer to that, and I'm just going to read that because I think it's, um, I think it'll bring up other topics for for discourse in the show. So this is what I said to him, and a lot of this relates to when I was talking about doing radio. Uh, this was a highly specific context, so it relates in some ways to production of this live stream. You know what I mean? But it also makes me think about what all has changed since those days. So this is going back 13 years. This is going back to 2005, 2004, 2003, 15 years. So I said, Dear son, in 2003, I decided to go work for the pacifist radio network Pacifica. It was founded by a conscientious objector to war in the 1950s in Berkeley. We're talking about someone, protesting the American entry into World War II here. As KPFA 94.1 FM in Berkeley. Then a network was born in the ensuing years, and I decided to go to work for that network. The country had recently endured an insane and arguably illegal election, and the intense and still not fully explained attacks of 9/11, 2001. War as a response was imminent under George W. Bush. Many of us loudly and actively protested and made protest art and writing against this. We marched. You marched with us as a 1 and 2 year old. I mean, you were younger than one, actually, son, if you ever see this. The station in Los Angeles of the Pacifica Network is KPFK, and I went to work as a news director there because I was concerned that the election of 2004 would be fixed for George W. Bush. I wanted to cover how the election was conducted closely. I wanted to look at it closely because the Florida situation was so unbelievable to me. I was working at George Magazine in New York City, and I had full access that night, election night, and then in the 13, 14, 17 days that followed, culminating in Bush v. Gore. I had close access to information at that time, and it was unbelievable to me. It was disheartening as an American. And it really made me want to look at the 2004 election very, very closely. I wanted a position from which to look at it. And I told Pacifica that. I said, look, I am very concerned that the 04 election is going to be problematic. And so they hired me in 02, I think. And in 03, I covered the recall. The recall election came up almost like a rehearsal. It was incredible. Schwarzenegger pulls off the recall, right? And so we covered that. I was the news director for the recall election. And that was kind of fascinating because, again, as a network, Pacifica seeks to give voice to people who don't have voice in context. And one of the things we were able to do was let Latinos express how the Democratic Party failed them by not backing Cruz Bustamante more aggressively and actively. Had they done that, Schwarzenegger would not, I think, even with the name recognition, have been able to pull that off. And we covered Schwarzenegger, I think, more aggressively than anybody else. Famously, on the night he was elected, I delivered the first words that our listeners heard were very pointed critical statement about him. And it was a very unusual time in California. But it's only gotten weirder since. Anyway, I digress. This was a motivation for me because your mom and I worked at George Magazine during the election of 2000, and I observed close up what was known as the Florida fiasco. The election was fixed, I thought, and George W. Bush was not elected, but rather was selected to be the President of the United States by the Supreme Court. Your mother worked for The Advocate, a human rights magazine that supports and fights for gay, lesbian, transgendered, and other isolated, underserved, and repressed cultures in the United States. So both your mom and dad were working hard to protest and protect rights amidst an illegal war and a false presidency that pushed hate and war on the world and the country. We were committed to protesting the war, protesting the ban on gay marriage, protesting the poor treatment of immigrants, gays, blacks, Latinos, and others. I made $60,000 a year, and I believe your mom made around $40,000. So we were a $100,000 household in LA with a new child. Throughout that year of the election of 2004, your mother and I discussed the idea of going abroad. She was nervously optimistic and knew that in me she had a partner who could help her travel. I had been around the world 4 times at that point and was working on projects in Sweden, London, Portugal. So in December of 2004, I took you and your mother out of the United States for the first time, and we went to Oaxaca to visit the Borsas, who are artists and friends of mine. They had 3 kids when the election of 2000 happened. They agreed it was messed up. They drove to Mexico until their car stopped and just settled wherever it stopped. They were amazing. With just very little Spanish, they just up and left to Mexico as their reaction to the impending 04 situation. I was proud of them, and I used them as an example all the time to talk to your mom about moving overseas, and in particular back to India. Your mom was the one who decided Japan was where we were headed. She found a job opening there. I knew I'd be working for Rigo in a lot of locations, and that I could, manage it through other mechanisms, art mechanisms, writing. We made incredible arrangements to take the dog and my son to Japan and then on to India. We were leaving the U.S. after Bush was re-elected, after I had proven on the air that he actually was not. And years later it was shown that Kerry had won Ohio and that the fix was in. We are still dealing with that. It's one of the reasons why I've been saying in the 21st century has been basically marked by fixed elections, illegal wars, and permanent surveillance with just, tools and machines all around us in everybody's pocket. This fixed elections thing started then. There are people still covering it, and it's still not. The United States' election process is still being. What do you want to say? It's still being addressed. How flawed it is. I've left a lot of this. That's what's weird about this to talk about. I haven't done this in many, many years. So we're talking about a long time ago. So then I was telling him, we took off, we arrived in Japan, and when we arrived in Japan, I was interviewed by the Japan Times, and this was the piece in the Japan Times, right? It was it's interesting now because this was me talking frankly to a writer there about what I was thinking was going to happen with me then, with us, with the United States, with my family, etc. And when I read it now, I hadn't read this in 15 years. I don't think. Well, it's not that old, is it? 2005. So I hadn't read this in 12 years. And then it led me to think about when I left KPFK, Pacifica as well. And so that took me to the last piece that was written about me in Los Angeles before I left, which was Embracing the Gadfly, the interviewed thoughts by Mark Herbst, who came to interview me just before leaving. So, real quick, I'm going to hit you with the this bit, the interview that was written by Herbst of me, then the interview in Japan. Okay? None of the things that I had thought of I thought were going to happen in my life after this happened. None of them. I mean, if the Lennon line, life's what's happening to you when you're busy making other plans applies, this is other plan central right here. But I think that there are a lot of people for whom losing the resistance to war, just losing the fight and just being the losers of that, and a focus group instead of a true pacifist movement in the United States of America, left many of us in the lurch. Then the '08 recession struck. So now any ideals you had about protest, were chucked out the window because now you have to fight for, economic position, some way to earn money. So this is according to Herbst. He asked 3 people for quotes, which I think are interesting too. You know what? I should just put these links up. I'm not going to read these. I'm going to put these links up, and you guys can take a look at them. I don't think it's interesting enough to put these links to read these fully out. But suffice it to say, I was leaving with intent, and when we returned, I think since even returning, I can say that I felt withdrawn. I don't participate anymore. I don't resist anymore, really. I'm not active. I turned it over to others. And I've watched as it has just decayed and become worse. The Obama presidency, to me, was not a resolution of the problem by any means. And in fact, looking for ways to make this a better country, I think is something that we've got to do more aggressively. It's not enough to wring our hands and lose. It's not enough to let small-minded media control the discourse. It's not okay to let elections be fixed the way we are with the number of votes that are being thrown out in key places, so that the electoral college falls the way people want. We need, I think, and I said this even in 2000, we need a new Federal Elections Commission Act. The Federal Elections Commission Act, which I believe was 1972, let's just look it up. FECA was the 1974, was the first to establish we have to regulate the elections better kind of deal. And a lot of good things came out of it, but it's clear that since then, radical change in modern society, including the advancement of digital technologies, demands a reassessment of the way we vote in the United States of America. And I think that it would be great if you could convince people in Washington to participate in such a thing. 74 FECA, that's because Nixon has happened, and the distaste for politicians is at such a peak point that you can actually get them to act on certain things that don't protect themselves. It feels sometimes like we're at a place like that today, but then voter turnout being so low and no real change happening as a result, I don't know, it doesn't actually feel like that. But maybe we're just missing some ideas. One of them is a FECA, a Federal Election Campaign Act, a new one. One that addresses the digital problems that we've been having. The fact that private companies owned these machines throughout 3 major elections in the 21st century is criminal. I mean, that's just insane. Control of the vote has to be monitored better. The way we do it with Secretary of States, because we're a federalist nation, we have the issue that the states can address how they handle elections independently. Now, that's all cool for local elections and state elections. I mean, arguably, I wouldn't say it's cool because I think manipulating the vote is wrong. But in a federal election, certainly we can't be subject because of the Electoral College to one state's behavior as we were in Ohio or in Florida. That's how is that still happening? Well, the answer is because people want it to happen. They're manipulating the vote. So I'm not sure. Oh, we're at the 40-minute mark, so that's another musical break, musical interlude here at the Anticlimactic Non-Show, a live stream. Starts every day at 5 in the evening in the UK. It's just about after work's ended. It's about, what, 5:41 in the UK right now. And it is just past 11 at night in Mumbai. Wouldn't it be cool if someone in Mumbai decided to watch this show and we could communicate back and forth? Okay, so this today is causing some problems for me because I'm realizing I can't see the chat window when I use that device to cast. Can I watch myself? Let's take a look and see if we can do that. Here, I'm going to do that while I put some music on for you guys to listen to. Whoops. Going over a mile and a quarter. A quick rundown the starters and the odds. Number 1, Babylon going on for 2-1. Number 2, Soul Youth going on for 3-1. Number 3, Rome going on for even money. Number 4, Pompeyus going on for 3-5, the big favorite. Number 5, Dreadlocks going on for 8-1. And number 6, Ballhead going on for 15-1. There goes the starter's flag. They're on the starter's orders. The gates open, the horses jump, and Dreadlocks is very slowly out indeed. Earliest in the headline, one can see it's Babylon the leader. Babylon the leader from Soul Youth, then there is Rome. Pompeyus going down past on the outside, then comes Ballhead, and Dreadlocks brings up the rear as they have a mile to go as they pass. Oh, here we go. I can. Awesome. So this is what I should do right here. From Soul Youth, then a length and a half to Rome, then Pompeyus, then a long gap to find Ballhead, then bringing up the rear still is Dreadlocks as they go around the clubhouse there with 7 furlongs. You know this one? It's a race between cultures. Babylon is very easy indeed. On the tight wraps. In second position is Soul Youth. Pompeyus goes on the outside in third. Then comes Rome. Then a gap to Ballhead. And Dreadlocks still after they're going by the 6 furlong marker. Still the leader by about 3 lengths now is Babylon. Second position is Soul Youth now. And Pompeyus is falling. Pompeyus is falling on the ground. Back to the lead, however, it's Babylon galloping very, very easy indeed from Soul Youth. Then there is Rome. Dreadlocks goes around now, and Ballhead now brings up the rear. They're coming around with just 4.5 furlongs to go. Who do you think's gonna win? It's Babylon by 3 lengths. In second position is Babylon, man. Third place is Rome. Dreadlocks makes a move, and it appears to be getting a lot closer up as they approach the 3 furlong marker. What the finish this promises to be as Dreadlocks is roaring his way to the field and is on the move. Babylon is still hanging on by about a length now. In second position is Soul Youth. Rome third. Dreadlocks is right on the heels, however, as they approach the 2 furlong marker. Makes the immaculate turn, whoever does Babylon, who appears to be under pressure on the far side. Here comes the red, green, and gold. Here comes the red, green, and gold. Dreadlocks and Babylon. Dreadlocks and Babylon. Something trying to think, but Dreadlocks and Babylon is going to think neck and neck. Dreadlocks, however, appears to be getting the best of their own field at 8-1. There's no doubt about who's going to win this one. It's a matter of who's going to run second. The Dreadlocks is cruising along. The jockey's looking back. The jockey's looking back. I love that. Dreadlocks comes on the whole field. Then comes Rome, and then there's an ambulance around the 7 furlong mark, just about picking up Pompeyus. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. So good. All right, so musical breaks. We're not sure what's going to happen. Oh, look what I figured out. I can actually chat with you. What's up, Count Pupper? You and me are the only viewers of this here program. But I can now actually use the chat, and I can see how late it is. That's the advantage. Hmm. All right, so let's see. I forget where we were in this program before that because now I'm getting excited about all the crap I can do. I can actually see the delay, which is great. And yeah. Now I forget where we were. How about we do one of these articles out of Harper's? All right, so this is the Harper's magazine. Go out and get yourself a subscription. 1850, the longest running American socio-cultural art uh, sort of literature, politics, history, a lot of great stuff in here. And every month they do something that they're known for, which is the Harper's Index. The Harper's Index is a collection of statistics that they pull together. Here you can see it, the Harper's Index, that they pull together and they stick in here. And the sources are all available for all of this. They have a page, you go flip to it, and you can see the sources. So I'm just going to read these today in the last 10 minutes here of the program, of the first hour of the AntiClimactic NonShow. This is the AntiClimactic NonShow with your host. Now this is the Harper's Index for December. The estimated number of Nigerians killed in clashes between herders and farmers over the first 6 months of 2018, 1,300 Nigerians. In fighting with the Boko Haram, 217. So clashes between herders and farmers, severe. Factor by which more Americans are murdered each year by knives than by rifles, 4. 4 times as many people, 4 times as many Americans are murdered each year by knives than by rifles. The number of states since 2010 that have repealed or weakened knife laws, 21 states have repealed or weakened knife laws. Chance that an American believes that all members of the armed services should be described as heroes, 1 in 2. That a German does, 1 in 7. Number of children since 2007 who have been denied UK citizenship for failing the country's character test to get into the United Kingdom, 517 children since 2007. The minimum age of children to whom the test is applied, 10. You have to be 10 years old to take the character test. Amount of FEMA funding that has been transferred to ICE this year, $9,800,000 from FEMA has been moved to ICE. Number of 200-year floods that Houston, Texas has suffered since 2015, 4 200-year floods since 2015 is what that stat is. Again, we can look up the sites for the sources are all cited. The beauty of the index is kind of just to accept that for the moment and just read the stats and get kind of hit by them. 4 200-year floods in Houston in the last 3 years is kind of a staggering comment on the potential of climate change, I would say. Okay, percentage of Americans who have had to evacuate their homes because of a natural disaster, 22% of Americans. Now, right now it's California, wildfires, hurricanes, floods. 22% of Americans have had to evacuate their homes because of a natural disaster. Distance in feet by which the Earth's axis of spin has shifted since 1899. 34 feet. The Earth's axis of spin has shifted 34 feet. That's minuscule, of course, compared to the size of the Earth, but interesting. Estimated percentage of that shift that is due to climate change, 40% of the shift due to climate change. Factor by which national parks have warmed more rapidly than the United States as a whole since 1895. 2.5 times more rapidly in national parks. Portion of U.S. households in 2015 that reported keeping temperatures at unhealthy or unsafe levels to save money. 1 in 10 households in the United States reported keeping temperatures at unhealthy or unsafe levels to save money. The average value of a payday loan in the United States, $375. Average amount a borrower ends up spending in fees on a payday loan, $520. Cool, Count Pepper. Nice feedback. Count Pepper is in. Change properties for your piano. Yeah, a lot of them are kind of depressing because they're a little bit. It's a little bit of a depressing time, but some of them are interesting and funny. Hopefully, there'll be some funny ones, not just bummer ones. All right, percentage of U.S. public employee applicants for student loan forgiveness who have been approved since last year, 0.3, 0.3% of public employees who apply for forgiveness of their student loans. Okay, portion of millennial men who identify as socialists or democratic socialists. 2 out of 5 millennial men identify as socialists or democratic socialists. Millennial women, 1 out of 5. That's pretty. That shocks me. That totally shocks me. And I find hope in that, Pupper. Right? I don't know. Kind of interesting. Percentage by which women are more likely than men to volunteer for work tasks that probably won't lead to promotions. 48% likelier women. Percentage of Americans who believe that men and women have different leadership styles. 57% of Americans believe that men and women have different leadership styles, just by fact of them being men or women. Percentage of those Americans who think women generally have the better approach. 22% think that women have the better approach, but who believe that men generally do, 15%. So that's a very interesting series of 3 there. 57% of Americans believe that men and women have different leadership styles. 22% think women have the better approach. 15% think that men do. So the remainder picked neither, presumably, of the 35, 37. So 20%, if you will. Portion of U.S. companies that claim to have been affected by prescription drug abuse among their employees, 7 out of 10. Minimum number of U.S. cities that have announced plans to establish supervised drug consumption sites, 5 cities. Estimated number of cities that have such sites worldwide, 100 in the world. Number of people who have ever died of an overdose at one of these sites, 0. That's cool. That's a cool, interesting stat. Shall I run those by again? Minimum number of U.S. cities that have announced plans to establish supervised drug consumption sites. There are 5 cities at least, and there are 100 at least in the world, and the number of people who have ever died of an overdose in those places is 0. Percentage by which a U.S. teenager is more likely to use marijuana than adults in their 50s or 60s. Okay, so a teenager compared to an adult in their 50s or 60s in the year 2011, 121% more likely. But by which adults in their 50s or 60s are more likely to use it than a teenager today, 3% more likely for the 50 to 60-year-olds. So the effect of marijuana legalization and decriminalization is being seen among the population that lived through the prohibition that was so absurd for the last, it remains absurd in many places, shall we say. So that, I think, was expected as well. Okay, factor by which the average South Korean man spends more on skincare than the average man in any other country, 2.3 times as much money spent on skincare. South Koreans. Portion of U.S. men who do not regard changing their underwear daily as very important. That's a quote, because this must be the statistical choice. Behavior, 1 in 5 are like, yeah, that's not very important. Percentage of Americans who say they have and enjoy a large social circle, 16% of Americans. Percentage of cell phone calls in 2017 that came from scammers, 3.7% of phone calls in 2017. Estimated percentage of cell phone calls next year that will, 45%. Percentage of Americans aged 13 to 17 who cite texting as their favorite way to communicate with friends, 35% of teenagers 13 to 17 say they prefer texting. and 32% say they prefer talking in person. So actually not that different, frankly. Percentage of interviews with professional baseball players that feature a variation of the phrase one game at a time. 7% of all interviews with baseball players includes a variation of one game at a time. Got to take them one game at a time. And a variation of a heck of a game, 50%. 50% of replies from baseball players include the phrase a heck of a game. 7% one game at a time. Percentage of adults last year who reported doing or learning something interesting the previous day, 46%. That's a pretty cool one. Yeah, I think that the internet and the information society and the digital generation and YouTube, forget it. I can learn more now for sure in a shorter amount of time, given the resources, if I want to. Yeah, the baseball stats are good. Count Pupper. And thanks for enduring all the depressing ones to get to the comedic ones there at the end. Yeah, well, I think the lighting looks pretty good. We're getting up on our first hour here of episode 3 of the AntiClimactic NonShow, which is often without a climax of any kind and is not technically a show. And the AntiClimactic NonShow is 20-minute breaks. You know, every 20 minutes I'm trying to throw a break in there. Count Pupper, the only viewer today, states that he definitely tries to learn something new every day, and it makes life worth it. And I am in agreement with our viewer, Count Pupper. And I think that when you watch this later, you'll be able to see whatever chat we do too on the replay. So that was the Harper's Index. We are 3 minutes from the top of the hour. There was one other thing in here that I wanted to read that was short, but it was weird. I remember thinking about it. Oh, yeah, this is pretty creepy. Pupper, this is pretty creepy. I'm not sure you're going to like this, but these are from explanations given by priests as to why sexual abuse was acceptable, as described in Pennsylvania's 40th statewide investigating grand jury report. This was released in August of this year, and it examined 70 years of abuse in 6 dioceses by more than 300 priests. The identifiable victims in this area exceeded 1,000 individuals. These are things that they themselves stated as to why they felt what they were doing, the sexual abuse they were engaged in, was acceptable. Quotes: touching is a priestly duty. Priests are instruments of God. God wants it. God loves all children. Convent recruitment requires kissing. Jesus says kissing is a sign of special friendship. This is stuff they said. Otherwise, the child is gay. That's a good one. These are free-spirited times. Anything goes. Touching is necessary to bless children's organs. Fondling detects cancer, someone said. Penetration saves mothers' souls. Mary licked Jesus after he was born. One of these priests used in a statement of why their sexual abuse was acceptable. Parentless children need their sense of self-worth affirmed. Naive children need to be educated. Roughhousing with boys is normal. Sex with boys isn't sinful. Touching builds trust. Everybody does it. And the last one, there is no hell. There is no hell. A priest accused of sexual abuse, in response to why that's acceptable, said because there is no hell. Craziness, man. All right, so that brings us to the top of the hour. And music time, once again. The Harper's Index was really long. So, And now the question becomes, do we go longer today? So the show starts at that time. I promised myself I would go an hour. Definitely. Every time. And then how much ever longer it goes over an hour, that just depends on the mood or whatever material we have to cover or etc. for the day. Today, it is the 1 hour mark of the AntiClimactic NonShow, and for editing purposes, that's why I'm doing this one more time, because later I'll just clippity clippity clop clop. And so let's listen to something else musically, shall we? How about some, what do you want to hear? Pupper, what do you want to hear? How about some Farida Hanum? What will happen if I put on some Farida Hanum? Is the question. A little Farida Hanum at the break here. I like the beats. I haven't listened to that in a while, a little Farida Hanum. Okay, so again, we don't know what's going on with the copyright rules, so I'm just dropping tidbits in at the every 20 minutes or so to kind of chill things out and just not have it be me rat-a-tat-tatting. However, I am treating this like radio. I do feel like this is a lot like radio. I mean, when we talked about the spectrum the other day, there's a thing where you don't let it die. You don't let dead air exist. Performers know about that, I'm sure, and if you do television, live television or live radio, that's a part of it. Keeping the spectrum vibrant with material that's interesting, so that people want to continue listening, is like the fundamental thing you learn or trying to achieve, I think, when you're doing live broadcast. This is weird, though. I mean, technically, I could not speak at all and just leave it roll for 10 minutes and continue just doing things around the studio. I haven't started setting up the show so that that's possible. Like, I haven't really been doing other things that I would normally be doing in studio during the show. Instead, I've been addressing the camera and trying to have more of a product, a thing that's engaging, where I'm an actor. I'm enabled as the host. So we may have to try to think about that as some change to the system here. Pupper, where are you? You're the only viewer, so where are you, by the way? Do you mind my asking? Are you in Australia, Tokyo, or UK, or New York, or Cali? Feel free to tap that into the old thing here, because I am curious about that. And what do I got? I think I might be out of stuff here. Show is starting to flag. Oh no. It might actually be Southern New Jersey. Cool. Count Pupper is in Southern New Jersey. So what's going on over there would be an interesting question. Let's take a look. What's your newspaper in southern New Jersey? Do you have a paper you read in southern New Jersey? Closer to Philly than New York. So one of the Inquirer? Is the Philadelphia Inquirer your paper? Let's see what the Philadelphia Inquirer has to say today, Pupper. Let's see here. Philly. Here you go, digital edition. Oh, I have to subscribe. Oh, but their cover is Hyde Smith wins Mississippi runoff. GOP now holds 53 seats, so they're covering that seat that went to the Republicans. I can't tell what's going on here. Oh, I have to sign in, that's why. So what's news, Pupper, where you're at? Would be a question to ask. I'm looking at some of this stuff right now. Yeah, see, I don't like dead air. I feel like I'm not casting when it's so quiet in here. There you go, nj.com, flea.com. Yeah, now Pupper brings up a great point. He says all the small papers merged and were lost around 2012. Now that was a tactic that had been going on here and in other places for a long time. The whole idea that you take a two-paper town and you turn it into just one voice basically. So there's only one entity that's pumping out all the information, and then you make that susceptible to control, like you have in the L.A. Times is owned by a media group that's clearly a conservative media group, the ones from Colorado and so on. Yeah, so that lack of independent local coverage is a definite casualty, I would say, right, of the modern deal, the whole digital environment. And they stopped paying writers too. They stopped making it possible to be a writer covering your area. I remember trying to write for different people in the Bay Area, and it was a pittance what they pay you, if they paid you at all, and they had no staff positions generally, or if they did, people gripped those because you weren't going to have that for very long. Yeah. I'm not sure. Now, see, so now here's the thing, Pupper. Now that you're involved too, I have to figure out how to make the dialogic, so it isn't just me monologuing here. With more viewers, obviously that'll be cooler. But one of the ways I would do it would be like if you write something, then I say it or whatever, or I relate to it, or if you throw a link up, we can look at those things together. Here, I'm gonna look at nj.com actually real quick too. Oh, cool! You're writing fiction, right on, man. I also enjoy writing fiction. What kind of fiction are you writing? Do you mind my asking? What sort of stuff? nj.com. I'm gonna look at nj.com while you're telling me that. I guess I could set this thing up to. Yeah, I don't think that's a deal anymore, right? I mean, writing for money has become just because of user-generated content, right? The whole like, I don't even know. And papers and magazines are disappearing. That's one of the reasons why I love Harper's, and I tell people to get Harper's because I really hope it continues to. It functions like a reader. It's a compendium. That's the beauty of this thing. Is they'll have an archive story. This is from 1976, a thing by Henry Louis Gates Jr. that was written in 76 in this magazine or whatever, Horror, sci-fi, and mobsters. That's cool. genre and pulpy stuff says, I guess when they watch this back, they're going to be able to see that, right? So this is what I'm talking about. I can't figure out what I'm. Right now, it's just you and me, so there's no reason for me to repeat what you've said. That makes no sense. Horror, sci-fi, mobsters are what you focus on. I haven't read much of that lately, have I? There's a mobster in that Jennifer Egan novel that I read that was pretty good. Uh, I've just finished a novel by. It was kind of a detective-y thing, but it was a literary detective thing. By Binet, this Frenchman, called The Seventh Function of Language. That's pretty good. You know who teaches in Jersey, in Syracuse, is George Saunders. Do you know? Are you familiar with George Saunders? Cal Pepper. I'm a big fan of his. Short story writer. He's just written one novel, the Lincoln in the Bardo, which came out I think last year. But he's a pretty interesting writer. This one you might like. The Brief and Frightening Reign of Phil is kind of interesting. The Brief and Frightening Reign of Phil is a very slim little parable, I would call it, by George Saunders. Let's talk fiction. That's cool. I love talking fiction, actually, now that Pupper has brought up fiction. George Saunders is, I think, from Texas, moved out to the East Coast, and has been teaching at Syracuse for some time. He's written a lot of different things. He'll appear in some magazines here and there. He did a thing for Vanity Fair a couple of years ago about the kid who didn't eat anything. That was amazing, man. He did this thing about a child in Tibet or somewhere that was basically had no food. And I'm talking about for days and days. Had achieved a kind of intense meditative stasis. Let me see if I can find that thing. It was really nuts. Uh, where was it? It was it in Vanity Fair? Or GQ or something? I want to find this thing about the kid, about the guy who, who starves himself. I can't find it. This is so annoying that I can't find this thing. George Saunders is who I'm talking about. I'm gonna put his name right here. This is almost everything he's ever written right here. This is just about everything he's written. Lincoln in the Bardo excluded that in the novel, which you can check out, but these are all titles of his. The Brain Dead Megaphone. That's essays. The Brain Dead Megaphone is essays. Actually, I think that might be where I read that piece. Buddha Boy. I think that's it. It's called Buddha Boy. Let's see if that's right. Yeah, the incredible Buddha Boy. In Nepal, there's this guy, a 15-year-old boy who hasn't eaten or drunk in 7 months is